3 months later, I get a letter in the mail from an angry student. She said, maybe you've noticed I haven't been in your class for the last 3 months. You know, want to know why? Because of that forgiveness thing you did. You told me, listen to how she reworded it, that I should forgive my father. And my father molested me when I was a child. And I'm not going to forgive my father. And I'm not coming back to the class. Wow. She took that pebble and made it into a mountain, right? But there's more. She goes, that's how I felt 3 months ago. So I kept thinking about my father, who I haven't talked to in 12 years. I kept thinking about him. And then finally, I called him about a month later, out of the blue. I found out his number, called, talked for hours on the phone. And then a miracle happened in that conversation. He agreed to meet with me with a therapist. I never thought he would do that, and he did. So a few weeks after that, we started meeting once a week with a therapist. Last week, I forgave my father in the therapist's office. I'm coming back to class next week. Now, it's great if we can help people to do wheel pose or handstand for the first time. But if we can initiate in any small way a healing like that, I think that is much more significant. At least I think it was to her. And remember, her first reaction was anger toward me. I took some heat over that. Yeah. And I'm sure there maybe were other people who were angry who didn't bother writing the letter. And I'm sure there are people who've never had an experience like she had doing the exercise. But even if it's only a few people, it's really big, because most people who are over 40 are carrying around a little bit of anger towards someone who really scarred them at some point. Whether it was in childhood or in business or marriage, or terrible rift with a teenager that is yours. We're challenged by it. So through simple exercises like this, gratitude, forgiveness, compassion, we can help awaken these emotions. I taught a class once, and this man came up to me afterward. It was a workshop. I'd never met him. And he came up and he was telling me how yoga has changed his life, that he's a different person than he was a year ago. And he was an unassuming guy. And he had taken the forgiveness workshop, and he said, this has given me a lot to think about, thank you. And he was very polite, and he left. The owner of the studio comes up and says, that man has a construction company with 20,000 employees. I was thinking, yoga is changing him that much. It's going to affect 20,000 people on some level at some point. We can't track this because the government isn't tracking this. They're tracking alcohol. If you get pulled over for reckless driving, the police officer will say, ma'am, have you been drinking? Or sir, have you had anything to drink tonight? But if you do something really kind for someone, police officers can come up and say, excuse me, do you practice yoga? So when a billionaire gives away $1 billion to a charity suddenly out of the blue, he's not asked that question, or she's not asked that question. So we don't know. But there are a few. The owners of Google, for example, they practice yoga. And they just funded the Tesla car, the new electric car. They're dumping billions of dollars into solar panels, trying to get us off of oil, whereas a lot of people aren't even trying. They're putting their money where their mouth is, and they're trying to make changes in the world. There's a company called Participant Films. I actually think they changed the name to Participant Media. Have you heard of them? Raise your hand if you've heard of Participant Media. Okay, about 5 of you. Here's some of the movies. Tell me if you've heard of these movies that they made. An Inconvenient Truth, Food Incorporated, Good Night and Good Luck, and their new one that's about to come out, Help Me Spread Goodness. There are people who are running corporations now that are trying to change the world. And a lot of them take yoga from you. You might not even know, because they just dress like everybody else. But But here's another one that you can say at the end of class when everyone has their eyes closed after meditation. Notice how you feel right now. Is there any way that you can take this more into your workplace? It's not very preachy. But people might be sitting there with tears running down their face and they think, he's right, and I know I can. And I've been meaning to for 3 years, and I've been putting this thing off, and I'm going to take the plunge. I'm going to make a new change. A change that happened with a big corporation recently was, I think it was last year, Walmart, which is not one of my favorite companies, decided to sell organic milk. You know what this did to the planet? You know what it did to the dairy industry? For the biggest buyer of milk in the world to suddenly say, we're going organic, change the dairy industry in 1 week. So when big corporations start to do things like this, big changes fast. So I want to finish by telling you one very short story about a group of people I met when I was 17 years old, and they're called the Mennonites. Have you heard of the Mennonites? It's not a band. It should be. Max and the Mennonites, I like that. For those of you who are from the part of the country that don't know what they are, you in the Midwest know who the Mennonites are, but if you're from the West Coast, you don't have the Mennonites out there. They're like the Amish, only less radical. You could put it simply like that. They actually will use electricity, they will drive a car, but they still live a very simple life, a very religious-based life. So when I was 17 in 1973, I think, my friend and I were on a spiritual quest throughout the Pacific Northwest. We had a Toyota Land Cruiser wagon, and we were going from commune to commune to small town to big town to meet all of these new gurus and messiahs in some cases. There were so many messiahs around these days. The children of God, all kinds of gurus. And we would go in and listen to someone speak and say, no, and keep going. It was a great education. While in northern Idaho, a friend was giving us a tour of the area, the countryside, this farmland. And I noticed that all these farms we just drove by, first of all, looked a little alike. And they were really tidy, as opposed to having 3 vehicles that don't work in the front lawn, like some of them. They were really clean and tidy, and they looked kind of beautiful. And I said, what's with these farms here? And he said, oh, those are Mennonite farms. I said, what's a Mennonite? So he explained it to me. And I said, how did they survive here? Because this is a pretty redneck community around here. I thought maybe they'd be persecuted, made fun of, maybe even driven out. He said, no, we love the Mennonites. They're really popular here. I said, why? He said, well, they're really good workers. He says, they'll never lie to you. They'll always show up on time. They do what they say they're going to do. They work hard. And if they don't do the work right, they'll come back and finish it for free. That's their reputation. That's a good reputation. So I was thinking about that and wondering if this community can get that reputation. If that's our next step, where someone's going to hire someone, and they're looking at job applications and say, well, we narrowed it down to these 3 people. Oh look, she practices yoga. That's her hire. She's going to do what she says she's going to do. She's going to work hard. She'll never cheat us, etc., etc. So my hope and my goal is for us all to take the next step. And people notice us now when we walk down the street with a yoga mat. And they say, oh, she practices yoga, he practices yoga. But that we gain a new reputation. And we're known by our actions, not just our flexibility and strength. That we become the most trusted community in the United States and the world as a whole. That the next time the president runs for president, or a candidate runs for president, they want to talk to us as a community. I tried to make that happen this last time, by the way. didn't take us serious. They figured they could talk to us through other communities, but not as a yoga community. Even when I used the term, almost 30 million people practice yoga, didn't matter. So what I ask you to do, this is your homework, is think of a way. Is there any way, as a yoga teacher especially, that you can change what you do, modify what you do a little bit, so that we get this reputation? And is there a way that you can impart it to your students?